Pokemon Day is only a few weeks away now, and it got me thinking, what does Pokemon have planned next? Rumors have been saying it could be anything in regards to Unova, some kind of Legends game, but I think it'll have something to do with Johto. So today, we wanted to go over some elements of what the games could be if Pokemon decided to go the Johto route. Here to give me a hand with this is Pokemon lore nerd Drogane.
What's up everybody, and thank you Mystic for having me back on your channel. Today we'll be discussing obviously the possibility of a Johto remake, but we also won't be disputing that concept at all here. But on my channel, after you watch this video, you'll be able to see our concept behind, is it possible that a Unovan remake may take place later on this year? But for now, let's turn it back over to Mystic and get this one started.
So to start, I'm just gonna call these the Johto remakes rather than the Gen 2 remakes, since technically we had a Johto remake during the 4th generation, and we're going to be incorporating some stuff from there in our new remake concept. Now, I'm not gonna get too heavy on how the themes of the games will be represented as much. We'll get to that, because in another video in the future, I'm going to go deep into the original Gen 2 games. Like, really deep. So we'll save those thoughts for that video. Look forward to it.
So where do we start? Well, let's get the obvious out of the way. The Pokemon. The original Gen 2 games had some key Johto Pokemon not available in Johto. The remakes fixed this in some ways, but I think it could still be improved. Houndour is a very common example. This is a Pokemon that should have been available earlier, quite frankly. I shouldn't have to wait until Kanto in Gold, Silver, and Crystal, and I shouldn't even have to wait until Johto Safari Zone in the remakes either. It was a good Pokemon in those games, but it's not some pseudo-legendary that needs to be kept at bay from the player until they have 6 to 8 badges. Plus, there are barely any fire types you'll have access to, more so in the original Gen 2 games, so this was always strange. While it shouldn't have been available too early in the game, it should have been still kind of like the fire counterpart to Mareep, as far as memorable and reliable choices for the player in their journey. I won't go on about this any further, as this is probably one of the 2 main complaints about the Johto games, and sometimes people even outright judge the entire games just based on the fact that some of these Pokemon are just unavailable before Kanto.
The other major complaint is the level curve. I think this is mostly better in the remakes already, but since a modern remake would follow current mechanics, I think there would definitely need to be some changes. We're in the era of experience share being far more powerful than it was before, so I'll just say it would need to be rebalanced accordingly. Personally, the level curve was never really the end of the world for me, but I do think some of the Pokemon choices for gym battles can still be improved. Price, for example, kinda sucks. Even in the remakes, is anyone really scared of this dude? He really could at least have more than 3 Pokemon, for example. You could even throw in Mamoswine as his ace to throw the player off, and use this as a way to introduce the concept of being able to evolve Pokemon past the Johto Pokedex earlier than you may expect in the game. Because, quite frankly, Piloswine never really did it for Price even 25 years ago. If not that, at least give Price a better team surrounding his ace, and maybe some strong held items. Some of these trainers really need it in the current landscape of the game. Now we get to a major concern regarding the future of remakes with this series. How will it look? This goes for basically any remake really, not just Johto. Like, I don't know if the cute chibi design of BDSP's overworld works for Unova, for example. Honestly, it didn't even really work for a lot of the time in Sinnoh. Watching Cyrus give this serious speech in BDSP was awkward. For Johto, I could see them getting away with it more, but it still leaves a lot to be desired. Honestly, I would try to do a modern version of how Oras handled it, assuming they want to keep the maps as faithful as possible. But I think it'd be good to mix things up and throw in inspiration from Gen 8 and 9, which I think they would anyway. Of course, some actual 2D design inspiration would not be something I'd complain about.
And also, on the subject of adopting stuff from Generation 9, Johto could be written to adopt a Terra mechanic in the story like how Hoenn had Mega Evolutions for that remake. This could also maybe be used if this isn't a remake and a Legends Arceus type Johto game instead, though I'm going to stick with the idea of a Johto remake for now as we wait for things to unfold as far as where Pokemon goes next. And also, What we would see in another Johto game are alternate forms of Ho-Oh and Lugia, like what we did with Primal Groudon and Kyogre. Now I still think that next time we see Johto, it may be closer to the remake treatment, but of course we'll have to wait and see for sure.
For the Ho-Oh and Lugia idea, I think there's a pretty solid path we could follow too. In Heart Gold and Soul Silver, they changed the ruins of Alph and added the Sinjoh ruins. Overall, the ruins of Alph always felt like there was something missing, even with the updates in Pokemon Crystal. I think we can use this area in a new remake to lead to something that gives us those alternate or upgraded forms of Ho-Oh and Lugia. Or at least Ho-Oh, since that's the Pokemon which is more likely to be connected to that area if we could only choose one. Not entirely sure what the other area would be for Lugia, but there are tons of potential areas to choose from, even possibly new ones. Johto is vague enough in some regards in terms of lore to be able to play around with.
Speaking of legendaries, there is also the subject of Yusin, who I think would still appear, but he was never terribly interesting in the original or remakes as a character, and always felt like a plot device to connect the player to the scripted Suicune encounter. I feel like we could change this. For one, I don't think the Suicune battle needs to happen in the main story. It can be more of a side quest you could follow along with as you play the game, but don't need to. The sort of thing the player could feel rewarded for by figuring out what Yusin is currently doing in the game by talking to the world's NPCs. The idea of players needing to communicate with each other goes all the way back to Generation 1, where there was no way online to do so. I also think that's just one way to play with the days of the week, and to really sell the idea that time is casually passing by in the game world. Some of these ideas could maybe make this game come off as a partial reimagining rather than just a straight remake, kind of like the difference between BDSP and Oris. But that's fine, especially in this case, as we already have the Johto remake from 14 years ago, which is pretty actively played to this day.
We also have some potential for Paradox Pokemon, specifically around the Burn Tower and its concept of Pokemon revived by Ho-Oh. Since some of these Pokemon seem to be intentionally, well, a paradox, and seemingly unexplainable and presumably from another version of the Pokemon world, I think it'd be interesting to see a totally different set of creatures that were revived in another world instead of the Beast Trio we got. Could also connect Walking Wake's trio to some alternate version of the Burn Tower too. But I don't think those Pokemon outright need an explanation. It feels a little predictable to just immediately connect those Pokemon to Johto. I'm cool with most Paradox Pokemon being a mystery. It's practically in the name. But it's cool to throw us a bone every now and then too when the opportunity to do so organically arises.
Team Rocket is another interesting case as far as changes and additions go. I think we could play into the weird cult personality Giovanni has under the group, despite his complete absence in the main story. It's strange, but even in the original Gen 2 games, Giovanni, who doesn't even show up in any sort of special event, still has a presence because of how obsessed they are with trying to get him back into the fold. Heart Gold and Soul Silver would end up including him in a time travel plot where we see him abandon Silver as a child, who turns out to be his son. I think we can expand on that a little more, but more so in subtle ways. Aside from Silver though, maybe some of the recurring grunts you encounter can be more identifiable and have a little more to say. This is a group that's really brainwashed into thinking that Giovanni would somehow be there for them even from the shadows to the ends of the earth. I always thought it was a little depressing. I think there's definitely more to say in these games regarding this subject. These individuals who are willing to risk it all for their absent leader that ultimately doesn't care about their fate.
One last major thing I definitely point out is fleshing out the Kanto part of the game even more. I think there's a chance to really focus on how the region has changed since Red defeated the Elite Four and became champion 3 years ago. Show us more of how the gym leaders and other NPCs have changed and what they're doing now. Give it an even cozier feeling, like we're returning home after a long trip, despite the fact that your trainer is not actually from Kanto. Or maybe like you're going into someone else's marked territory with a long legacy. Both vibes work here, and play to the strengths of why people love the addition of the Kanto region as the post-game of Gen 2.
However, in reality, we have to be careful if these games even incorporate nice changes or addition to content because, the likelihood is we also don't know whether or not they're doing a Johto or Unova remake at all. And even if they do, there's no reason for us to believe that they're not going to go in a BDSP style direction. The reason for this is simply because while Legends Arceus would fit either a Unova or Johto reimagining or remake, the likelihood of this game coming out as a Legends game is very slim to none, considering how experimental those games were. And the allotment of time for, obviously, development is not going to be something that's going to appease a 2024 release date, rather than a simple, bare bones, BDSP style remake of either Johto or Unova. But with that being said, I guess only time will tell. For those of us that love Gold, Silver, and Crystal and Heart Gold and Soul Silver will probably still like and appreciate even a mundane remake. But it's not unfair to want more, especially if they're going to remake this game for a second time in some way or another.
Well, that wraps up this discussion. What do you guys think? Let me know your thoughts down below, and be sure to check out when Drogane posts our video about Unova sometime next week.
Thanks for watching this video that Mystic and I put together. Make sure you tune into my channel sometime next week, where we're going to be discussing the possibility of how a Unovan remake may be coming out at the end of 2024. But until next time, I'm Drogane, and I'm out.